Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
The elections are over. While we wait for results, we are sure of one thing, that next week there will be another government in the country, model code of conduct would have been lifted, and that government again will focus back on the longer term policy and governance issues. So it's time for us also to start visiting them. You can spend hours talking about the various things that are left pending and where the government will have to pick up the thread. But let me talk about one today. I can talk about India's economy. I can talk about India's strategic situation, because in both of those areas, a lot needs to be done. There's a lot of work ahead and there are lots of opportunities and challenges ahead. But suppose I talk about another company's economy, and through that talk about India's strategic interests and options and India's economy. And that country is the country that interests us most of all, that is Pakistan, whose shadow hung very heavily over this election campaign. So what's happened in Pakistan lately is that Pakistan has now been sanctioned its loan of $6 billion. Remember, $6 billion. How much money is that? That's about 42,000 crores. That's the kind of money, I mean, it's a lot of money, but I just want to give you a ballpark comparison. That's about the money, or maybe a little more than that, that ArcelorMittal is paying for the bankrupt SR Steel to acquire it. So only for that much money, and obviously ArcelorMittal will borrow most of that money from banks in India and overseas, just for that much money, $6 billion, a sovereign state of 21 crore people with nuclear weapons, with a very large army, with great pretensions to being an important country, blessed with very important geography. Geography is Pakistan's greatest asset. But despite all that, talented people, despite all that, it has had to go to IMF for just $6 billion. Just less than the amount of money, I'll say again, that Lakshmi Mittal will pay to acquire bankrupt SR, and and most of that money will go to Indian banks after some haircut. So that is the state of Pakistan. So look at the strategic picture for Pakistan, very powerful, great army, great weapons, can stand up to India in a short skirmish anytime. A long war is something, will be something else, but long wars are unlikely now. At the same time, has to go begging to IMF for $6 billion, 40,000 crore rupees as Indian exchange rates go. Now, for 40,000 crores, IMF wants it to do many, many things. One of which is let its rupee go in free float. Pakistan hasn't yet done it, but the currency markets have taken the signal. So Pakistani currency touched 149.50, little bit more in open markets. It's today settled at about 146, 147. But it is understood, if you go to the IMF website and read the IMF report on the sanction of this loan, you know that there will be compulsion on Pakistan to let their rupee find a market denominated rate. That could be anything. People in Pakistan, if I read Pakistani media, are giving alarming numbers like 200. But whatever it is, it will become weaker. Now what happens? When your rupee becomes weaker, all right, your exports can become better. But again, for that, go to the Twitter handle of a great Pakistani economist, Atif Mia. Atif Mia is at a premium, has a big job as a professor in an Ivy League university. He was with Pakistan government, but he had to be turned out, much as Imran Khan wanted him to advise Pakistan a way out of its economic crisis. He had to be turned out of Pakistan or of that job because he is an Ahmadiyya, but he is still a Pakistani patriot. So he's put out a series of tweets today explaining this. Some of this is in jargon, which I have had to once again Google and understand, so I will not try to simplify that for you. But basically what's he saying? He's saying if you let the Pakistani rupee weaken greatly, it can theoretically help your exports. But because Pakistan doesn't have that much to export, so what is it that you can now export in greater quantity that you are not doing right now? Second, he says the moment you let the rupee weaken, the cost of your own debt repayment goes up. So over the next 7 years, Pakistan has to repay $30 billion of debt. That is 5 times the money they are borrowing right now from IMF. I am giving you comparisons to put things in perspective. Again, the IMF says that this loan cannot be used to repay any loan to the Chinese, because Chinese loans are conditional to CPEC and the projects that the Chinese are carrying out. So as Pakistan hurtled from crisis to crisis, they have already borrowed nearly $8 billion between the Chinese and the Saudis. Saudis, I don't know, things happen between brothers, but the Chinese never give you money for free. If anybody thinks that you can borrow from the Chinese and get them to forget about it, it's not going to happen. They can check with Sri Lanka and what happened to Hambantota, or they can just Google Hambantota. The Chinese don't give you money and forget it. So in this situation, once again Pakistan is an IMF addict. Every few years it has gone to IMF. Depending on how you count it, it could be 6 to 8 times in the last about 30 years. In 2008, it took something like an 11.7 billion bailout, but it wasn't able to draw more than a little over 7 billion because the government then was not able to live up to the commitments made to the IMF, so IMF stopped it. Then Nawaz Sharif's government went pleading to IMF. It was given a 9-month moratorium. Some more money was released, but again it was stopped because those conditions were too onerous. Then Pakistan got another rescue package of nearly $7 billion. So in the past 10 years, nearly 18 billion have already been taken. Now this other 6 billion is coming. You borrow that kind of money from IMF if you are really in deep trouble and going over the precipice. What is underlying all this? Underlying all this is an economic stall in Pakistan now for a long time as the country has lurched from crisis to crisis. So if you look at some basic figures, look at the IMF, you can go to the IMF website as I did, and IMF has a list of countries ranked by per capita GDP, not purchasing power parity, this is nominal. So Pakistan, $1,555 per capita. Bangladesh, $1,745 per capita. So Bangladesh is already more than 10% ahead of Pakistan. And India, 2,036. That's more than 30% ahead. If you've been watching Cut the Clutter, you would remember an episode, you can check it out on our YouTube channel, where I had said that when I first went to Pakistan in 1985, Pakistan's per capita income was 65% higher than India's. And I had then said that this fall in Pakistan's economic indicators over these years, over almost 35 years, was mainly the penalty that Pakistan had paid for its establishment, the ISI and the army, using terrorism as an instrument of its strategic activity, mainly in its neighborhood. So there are the numbers. But look at some other numbers. This gap will increase. Why? Because again, I am only going by IMF. Pakistan's per capita income, Pakistan's GDP growth rate, net growth will be 2.8% only. India's is not as high as it used to be in the past, given the fact that we have redefined the way we calculate our GDP. But last year, Government of India statistics said 7.2%. Globally, it's accepted that India grew last year at 7.2%. It may grow this year at 7%, 6.8%, which is more than almost 3 times of Pakistan's, 2.5 times for sure. But see, there is an interesting character in this mix, and that character is our neighbor to the east, Bangladesh. Bangladesh growth this year last year was 8.2%. Now, India, Pakistan and Bangladesh are growing much faster than India. There is an India-Bangladesh competition also that India has to worry about, but that we can talk about on some other day. But at this rate, the gap between Pakistan and India and Bangladesh is now rising. Pakistan is falling behind. More importantly, Pakistan's population growth rate is twice as high today, almost twice as high as India's. Pakistan has one of the among larger countries in the world, among the fastest growing populations. So what happens? Your total national GDP is divided by your population. So every year, because your population is growing twice as fast as your neighbors, your per capita income is further depressed by that much. So Pakistan is right now going down the slide backwards, and they don't know what to do. This $6 billion from the IMF is just steroid to keep the patient alive. Then the specialists will come. Those have to be Pakistani economists, but more importantly, Pakistani politicians, and even more importantly, Pakistani generals, because they have to decide what they want. Now, we can always say, oh, beggar the Pakistanis, right? But there are limitations to what kind of an economic war India can launch on Pakistan. At the same time, there are limitations to what kind of military war India can launch or win against Pakistan. Because as I said earlier, Pakistan has very strong armed forces. In a short skirmish, as we saw after Balakot, Pakistan can collect enough forces to at least match you evenly. So you cannot overwhelm them in a short skirmish or a 2-day or 3-day war. Maybe in a 2-week war or 3-week war you can do it, but 2-week, 3-week wars do not happen these days. And even if such a thing were to happen, the nuclear risk will always be there. I do not believe that the global community, the UN, Donald Trump, Xi Jinping will allow such a thing to happen. So unless you have the kind of overwhelming, immediate punitive superiority militarily, which will take some time, what are the other ways of dealing with Pakistan? It is not to choke them economically, because India has nothing to choke them economically. Whatever trade was there is now more or less stopped and new duties have been levied. So maybe Pakistan can be made to see the economic benefit of now piping down, calming down on what they are doing in Kashmir. That's why the statement that Imran Khan has made, indicating that his NSA may get, he'll appoint a new NSA may get involved in talks, etc., is an interesting statement, because every country needs peace, but Pakistan at this point particularly needs peace more than any other country, especially India. Because in India, the risk from a warlike situation has been factored in. As long as what's happening is happening in Kashmir, it's like India's got used to it, like it's a chronic problem. So you take your pills and you take your insulin and you carry on. Pakistan, on the other hand, is now bleeding in a manner that its entire population is hurting, that its global interest is, global respect is hurting, and there is no way the Chinese and the Saudis will bail it out further. So it is in Pakistan's interest to move towards peace, and because your adversary is vulnerable, I know that there is Schadenfreude, that let them suffer. So you can have that approach also, but that's a tactical short-term approach. If you want to look at a longer-term approach, I'm not saying give money to Pakistan. Gandhi said that, and you know what happened. I'm not saying give any money to Pakistan, but let the Pakistan work on the Pakistani desperation right now to find peace, to meet these IMF conditionalities, because they are a country that is on the verge of bankruptcy. Also, dividends of peace will be great for everybody. I just told you, I gave you these figures, and I know that as Indians we feel great that we are 30% richer than the Pakistanis on per capita basis, or even Bangladesh is ahead of them. But two little things. One, a Stanchart report just said that if this growth differential between Bangladesh and India continues, then by 2030, Bangladesh may also beat India on per capita GDP. So India has to increase its growth rates. Second, India may be the tops in the neighborhood, Bangladesh second, Pakistan third. But really, it's like winning gold medals in SARC athletic games. Because compared to the world, where do we rank? In the same rankings, India, the top of the pops in the subcontinent. Keep Sri Lanka aside, I will tell you about Sri Lanka. India is $2,036, rank 142. Bangladesh, 1745, rank 147. Pakistan, 1555, rank, Bangladesh, 145. Pakistan, 1555, rank 147. So our three countries, two of which have nuclear weapons, are ranked 142, 145, 147. And see what is happening elsewhere in the world. Indonesia today, the per capita income is 2.5 times that of India. Vietnam is also ahead of us, a little bit marginally, but Vietnam is ahead of us and now will be leaving us behind more rapidly because its manufacturing has picked up. And within the subcontinent, don't look at Pakistan, look at Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's per capita GDP is now almost twice as high as India's. So there is a lot of work to do. India has to build its defense and military, etc. But that is to avoid war and conflict. That is to build a deterrent. Otherwise, the time to move towards peace sometimes is when your adversary is at its weakest. I would say that in this state of economy, Pakistan is in a situation where it has many compulsions to make peace. I know that there are elements in the Pakistani establishment who would try to avoid it, but with the new government in India, this is the best time to move in that direction and work on your adversary's vulnerability by incentivizing peace. Remember, what is $6 billion? $6 billion, if Pakistan did not have this madness about India and Kashmir, etc., they could have raised a bond of $6 billion overnight in India and repaid it and securitized it and repaid it only purely through transit fees that Indian goods and traffic would have paid going through Pakistan into Central Asia and coming back from there. So you open up trade in the region, you earn money from it, you securitize that money, $6 billion is nothing. Then pipelines could be built between Iran, Qatar, India, all the old pipeline projects which were set aside earlier because of the conflict between the two. So the incentive from the conflict is from ending this conflict is for everybody. Incentive for Pakistan is the strongest because Pakistan's incentive right now is survival and self-respect and its sovereignty.